Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, beyond the headlines, beyond the spin. Straight facts, sharp analysis, and common sense conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Kevin Klein. Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. I am joined by two of my colleagues. Jeff Courier is off sick today. We have Royce Coop, Winnipeg Sun columnist and professor of political sciences at the University of Manitoba. And then we have our newest co-host, Lawrence Pinsky. Now, Lawrence, I always get these introductions of you wrong, so I figure what I'll do is I'll allow you to introduce yourself, and then we can all applaud and cheer in the background. So it's Lawrence Pinsky.
Lawrence Pinsky.
Yeah.
King's Counsel.
King's Counsel.
Lawyer.
Yeah.
Former human rights adjudicator, and all-around swell guy.
Well, you know,
maybe I should let you do it.
Yeah,
maybe I should let you do it.
I think we're good with that one. We'll be fine. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate you having me here. And listen, I got to tell you, at first in the start of the week, I thought we're not going to have much to talk about. And then, of course, Carney got to work, and now we have lots to talk about. And I want to start off the show with comments made by the interim parliamentary budgetary officer about the Canadian economy and the budget coming forward. Listen to these words very carefully.
Everybody should be concerned. My jokes aside, it's a really serious day, right? This is the first time in 30 years that we've tabled an economic and fiscal outlook where the fiscal anchor of the general and probably most important fiscal anchor for any government is a declining or at least stable debt to GDP ratio. And this is the first time in 30 years that I've seen one in which that ratio is going up over time. So that's definitely a cause for concern. Certainly on our end, we're hoping and certainly expecting the government as part of Budget 2025 to clearly indicate what the government plans to do to address this and potentially address this problem, because it's certainly not sustainable.
Well, if he hasn't painted a picture of doom, I don't know who has, because it sounds to me like he is ringing alarm bells, and he is trying to ring them very, very loud, that Canada is going in the wrong direction, and we're going in the wrong direction fast. Royce?
Yeah, it's scary stuff. Things are much worse now than they were in the 1990s when we entered into a period of genuine austerity under Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin at the time. You know, it's really hard to find the victories that Mark Carney has had since the election. We keep seeing rakes that he's stepping on, and this is the biggest one of all. And so I agree with you. I think Canadians need to pay attention to this. There are tough times coming, and the government is not doing anything to help prevent that.
But I think it's more than just tough times coming. I mean, he painted a very bleak picture, and I can't recall a time when a parliamentary budget officer would paint such a bleak picture. And we are hearing of more and more companies leaving the United States. We heard about the Canada Post strike. We'll talk about that and how much they're losing. But Lawrence, I think it's more than just one bad budget. This is 10 years of bad economic policy, pretty much led by Mark Carney.
Well, certainly since I think it was 2020, is that right? When Mark Carney became essentially the chief financial advisor to Mr. Trudeau. So we see, and we sounded the alarm bells here quite some time ago. Now the parliamentary budgetary officer is also sounding them. He says the situation is unsustainable. It cannot continue. And he's exactly right. And if I can take a moment to think a little locally, the effect on Manitoba is going to be devastating, and all of Canada. Why? Have not provinces depend on federal government handouts. There have to be, as Roy said, there will be austerity. That's what's going to happen at some point. I don't know when Mr. Carney is going to do that, because there's so much talk about an election coming up in the summer or fall of 2026. So, but the piper will have to be paid. And for Canadians who got duped by his resume, this has to be a real wake-up call to say, my God, we are on the wrong path.
Now, I look at it from a business perspective. I don't see any government at any level, whether it be the city of Winnipeg, province of Manitoba, or any province across the country, with the exception of Alberta, and the government taking this debt seriously, taking what's happening in Canada seriously. And I don't say that to be, mean or just make a comment. I sit back and I watch these politicians, and I was a part of a political party. I sat in the legislature. I've sat as a city councilor, and really what I saw there, people ask me, what were your times like in politics? And I say, I don't think these people really understand how bad things are. We have been on this trajectory for a while. I really don't think that Carney and a lot of these people are taking it seriously, Royce.
Yeah, in politics, the debt and the deficit are, no one wants to talk about them until they become a crisis. They want to talk about spending, they want to talk about new initiatives. And so this is the problem. Now, back in 2015, it was the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper who clearly identified some of these things Justin Trudeau was saying. He wasn't interested in monetary policy. He thought budgets balanced themselves. Well, anyone that lives in a family, runs a business, anything knows that, you know, balancing a budget is a tough thing to do. And so there were alarm bells back then, and now we've have 10 years of government in which these things were not front of mind. And the real concern with this press conference from the parliamentary budget officer seems to be that Carney is not turning things around. There's going to be a continuation. We're going to keep sailing towards the iceberg rather than away from it.
I don't think we're that far from the iceberg. And Lawrence and I were at an event where the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper spoke, and Ben Mulrooney had asked him, who was the host of this event we were at, if how he felt being right. All those things he said so many years ago.
Yeah.
How do you feel about being right? And to his nature, he was very humble about it and just said, "I'm worried."
Yeah. Yeah, people should go on YouTube and find clips from the 2015 election campaign. Pretty much everything Stephen Harper said has turned out to be true. That's just an objectively correct statement.
Lawrence, do you see a path for to us to save us happening, or is it just going to be an election that saves us?
Well, I think unfortunately it's an election that's going to save us. I was going to say you commented earlier, Kevin, about businesses that are leaving Canada, headed for the States. The biggest culprit, Brookfield, run by Mr. Carney, left to New York. And again, and I said this last week, Canadians need to understand what's going on and pass the national IQ test that is an election, and say we're not going to be blinded anymore by a CV, and that's what happened last time, and of course by Mr. Trump's rhetoric. Instead, they have to look at the facts, and the facts are it's only Alberta and Saskatchewan that have their economic houses in order. Manitoba is a complete basket case of a have-not province that has the resources to be a have province and is deliberately deciding not to be a have province, and dependent on welfare handouts that just will not be able to be sustained or continue. And that should be ringing enormous alarm bells. So, do I see an answer outside of an election? I don't. And if you read Mr. Carney's book, we've talked about this before as well. It is a roadmap of disaster. That's what it is, and that's what it's going to be, and that's the road we're on.
Something that we've all talked about, and I've long talked about, is the amount that we pay to service our debt, right? And we always call it servicing our debt in politics because that way we don't really say it's debt or interest payments that we're making. It's servicing our debt. We're doing the right thing by servicing our debt. The city of Winnipeg pays millions and millions and millions of dollars every year to service their debt. The Manitoba government does. And in Canada, the federal government, according to this new parliamentary budget officer, could be paying over $65 billion a year just on interest payments for our debt. Now, everyone talks about how our healthcare system is number one and we've got to make it better. Well, folks, we pay less than $65 billion a year for healthcare transfers. So our biggest expense now is starting to look like interest payments because the kids got out of the house with all our credit cards and racked them up. And I think that that's what we've got to start, talking about more, Royce.
Yeah, it's the cost of weak-willed, lily-livered politicians. Money that gets flushed down the toilet rather than being spent on healthcare, on the hundreds of things that Canadians are concerned about. And when debt gets downgraded, when we are paying more to service our debt, then that's when all of a sudden people start to pay attention. You know, in BC, British Columbia is in a very difficult financial position right now with its debt and its deficit. And it didn't take long. The current premier, David Eby, has only been there for a few years. The previous NDP premier, John Horgan, was much more of a responsible fiscal manager. It's only been under Eby that things got out of control in British Columbia. They're facing the prospect of debt being downgraded. And the lesson I took from that is that we as voters have to be much more critical of politicians, much more responsible, to choose politicians that are actually going to be responsible stewards of the public purse. The costs of not doing so, we're finding now, can be horrendous.
Well, for the last several years, I've been saying that the unfortunate part at city council and at the provincial level that I saw is people were electing activists. They're not electing people who understand business and understand how to do a budget. We're electing activists that are looking for likes, or they're looking to change the world society. They're looking at virtue signaling and such. And I know that it is very important to start thinking about this seriously, because my fear, Lawrence, and maybe you can help explain this a little further, is my fear is that people don't realize this is all our fault. We put this government in place, whether you voted for them or
Yeah.
not, or if you didn't vote, I think you're the biggest problem we have, because you should have got out and vote. But it looks to me like we, as Canadians, have put this government back in, or really Ontario and Quebec. And how do we change that?
Well, part of it is messaging, of course. I do agree with you. In a democracy, the people get the government that they deserve, that they vote for. And so, and I don't say that to be negative, and I'm going to take a moment to be positive in a second, but it's true that we get what we deserve, and we voted, we as Canadians, not we as the people on this podcast, we as Canadians voted for Mr. Trudeau, essentially for the fourth time, flying under the banner, under the mask of Mr. Carney, who really was under the mask of Mr. Trudeau. It's like an Escher painting gone bad. And that's what this is. And it really, I agree with everything that Royce has said and that you've said, Kevin. I would like to change the system. I'd like to be an activist for sound policy, because there's one pool from where all the money comes from to pay for everything: the taxpayer. In Manitoba, for example, we have one of the smallest tax bases of any jurisdiction in North America. That means the fewest people paying the most taxes. And as Mrs. Thatcher once said, there comes a limit to how much of their money, of our money, they can take. And that's, I guess, the problem, because that same money has to fund roads. As you know, our defense budget is supposed to be 5% of GDP. So that's going to be yet more spending, healthcare, social services, on and on and on. And we just don't have the money for it if we don't get our fiscal house in order. And that means allowing businesses to grow, businesses to employ people. And that means cutting back on all the government spending. Imagine a scenario, though, where BC had more LNG plants, where Manitoba allowed our silica sands to be developed, where hydro could be actually produced responsibly instead of at the greatest cost, where pipelines would be built. My God, pipelines would be built to get our gas and our oil to Tidewater. And think about this for a moment in terms of the environment, even. The fact is that pollution and greenhouse gases don't stay in the country that produces them. So, for example, China has umpteen number of new coal plants online. Coal, dirty coal, not clean coal, dirty coal. Imagine if Canada could get our natural gas to market, to Tidewater, so that we could actually export it to China, to India at market rates, saving the environment, creating jobs, creating a useful, healthy economy, and getting our spending under control.
Well, it's great to have those pipe dreams, but I mean, let's be honest. When you're in politics and you sit in that room, these people aren't having those conversations. They're talking about buying votes. What program can I put in place? And I think, Lawrence, I think you have to look at blowing it up and starting over again, almost, right? Like I have long tried to get governments to consider, and I know some in the U.S. have, and it's worked for them, zero-based budget reviews. But if you talk to any politician about it, they get scared. They don't understand really what it is. They try to hide from it. But I think the non-essential spending that's happening, we have to clean that up before we can even develop all these more LNG places because we don't have the money. And I'll tell you a quick story, gentlemen. I met a business guy the other day. He deals with this large company out of Toronto. They were looking for some investment, some capital. And the company that was willing to give them all the money they needed said, yeah, we can give you the money, but you're going to have to move out of Canada. Where? We don't care, but we don't want you in Canada. So if you don't leave Canada, we're not cutting you this check. That scares me.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're simply put, Kevin, you're absolutely right. We have to get our fiscal house in order. We have to get our messaging in order. And you cannot expect that to happen with the government we have in place that's been in place since 2015, essentially.
Royce?
Yeah, and Lawrence is right that some of the ideological commitments to the government make it impossible to be responsible fiscal managers on the environment, for example. A good example is that the former natural resources minister, Jonathan Wilkinson, he thought that demand for oil was going to peak 2 years ago. It was going to level off, and the government was operating on that assumption. Of course, demand for oil is higher this year than it ever has been. And so we had a government that was actively sabotaging its own goals. And the reason for that is because it had these ideological commitments that weren't consistent with reality. So we got to look at this stuff too. I mean, of course, we need more pipelines, and the current government is making a lot of noise about that. But we have to actually see some concrete plans for how that's going to happen.
I think without them, companies aren't going to be coming to Canada. But let's talk about
Yeah.
government spending and use another example. Canada Post. $10 million a year is the report that they're losing. $10 million a year. And the government is just starting to step in and make a couple of changes like, oh, well, we're going to stop door-to-door delivery at the remaining places in Canada that have that. Like that's going to save the day. That to me is like virtue signaling. We're trying to do something. We're trying to save money, but they're not taking it seriously enough. If you're losing $10 million a day and you cut out the door-to-door and that saves you $2 million, you're still losing $8 million a day. So when does the government, or really when do citizens say, we can't do this anymore? We can't keep this going forward. And when do we say enough is enough as a people to really, I mean, if Canada Post can't make money, when the courier companies, Purolator, FedEx, UPS, all make millions of dollars. These are for-profit companies. It really tells us that we have the wrong people in government.
I think it's more complicated, though, than that, Kevin. And I want to go back a little bit. My recollection is that before Mr. Trudeau, the Harper government, they had wanted to stop door-to-door delivery. Mr. Trudeau campaigned against it. And I think I remember a Montreal politician, maybe the then mayor, taking a jackhammer and going at one of those post office box things as a political stunt. But Mr. Harper, as we talked about earlier, was right. It costs a whole bunch of money to have door-to-door delivery. It achieves really nothing, and it costs millions of dollars every year. That's also going to just keep growing. So we have to think about privatization a little bit on this question. There's different ways to privatize companies. Mrs. Thatcher Mr. Cameron privatized the British Postal Service years ago, and that's probably what has to ultimately happen here. On parcel delivery, they can make money if it's run like a business, not like a bureaucracy. On mail, they can probably break even if it's run correctly, and it can't be baby steps. It has to really be a return to privatization. And frankly, in the 90s, my recollection is the government of Canada, under Monsieur Chrétien and Mr. Martin, they privatized a bunch of things. The biggest example is NAVCAN, which is a private company dealing with air traffic control. We can do it. We've done it before. We have to do it on this issue. In terms of what Royce said about, essentially boils down to centralized planning, which is something Mr. Carney wrote about in his book and likes and wants to increase, which we've seen for years from the Soviet Union, from the British Labour Party historically, is a failure. You have to have trust in people. And Mr. Carney doesn't. He has trust in himself and those who he thinks know better. And that's a huge mistake. It's always been thus.
But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, Lawrence, that the government could take. For example, you look at executive salaries. If you go through Canada Post, there's probably, hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on middle management and executive salaries. That's the low-hanging, non-essential fruit that I think governments could take care of, because that's what we would do in a corporation. We would look at those situations. We wouldn't hand out bonuses like the CBC in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to executive staff that are making far too much money today. These are the non-essential things that you would think a fiscally responsible person would do when he got control of a country that is losing to debt. We are losing to debt. We're becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and we cannot continue to sustain it. So, Royce, why won't governments take action on these middle management or take action on executives or stop paying bonuses? Why won't they take these actions that we know will make an impact?
Well, we have a liberal government that's sympathetic to the executive class in this country. The problem for Canada Post is, as you say, there's a lot of money spent on ridiculous things like executive salaries. They also had they're getting their lunch eaten by these private companies that are kind of stealing the most profitable aspects of the business, shipping packages, and they haven't responded to that appropriately. But I might be kind of the odd man out here. I mean, the problem is you need a mail service. For the time being, people need to get their mail. They need to get bills until they move entirely to email. And one of the NDP leadership people, Avi Lewis or Avi Lewis, I'm not sure I'm saying his name right.
It's Avi.
Avi, he came out against this. He said, look, we shouldn't talk about public service like it's a business. Like, this isn't a bailout. Government pays for water, it pays for road repairs, and mail needs to get delivered. And so this sort of language that the Liberal Party uses, kind of, well, we've been bailing out Canada Post. Well, no, people need to get their mail. Let's kind of be honest with Canadians about the problems here and about the solutions. Let's talk about it in an election campaign. Don't just like dump this on people like, oh yeah, by the way, we're getting rid of this. We're getting rid of home delivery. I know this will probably be an unpopular thing to say, but I actually like home delivery. I think that a civilized and wealthy country should have home mail delivery. I'm sorry that that's not possible anymore. I mean, it was possible for 100 years, but suddenly it's not possible. Give me a break. I mean, we get to make choices about how we spend our money in this country.
Well,
Royce,
I think you
Royce,
pick one or the other, right? Sorry, Lawrence. You pick one or the other. Are you going to be in the package the business, or are you going to deliver mail? So
Yeah.
maybe to Lawrence's point, sell off the packaging business. Get out of that side of the business because you're not good at it, you're failing at it, and you're losing money. And just focus on mail delivery and get rid of the non-essential costs. And I think that Lawrence is what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go back to Royce. You said as a wealthy country. The point we're making is after 10 years of Liberal government, we aren't.
Yeah.
We aren't a wealthy country anymore. And Manitoba certainly is a have-not unwealthy province. We could be a wealthy province, but we're not. And I guess that's the point. I would say the lesson of history, if we want to pay attention to it, is that a government can't run a business. And you know that even personally. You treat your own car much differently than you would a taxi or a bus or something else you don't own. And that's the reality for humans. That's just the way it goes. And Mr. Lewis is wrong, as he's wrong about so much else. The reality is that if you run the postal service like a business, which can only be done by a business when it's privatized, then it doesn't have to cost us millions of dollars every single year. We don't have to bail things out. It could actually work. That's what we see in other jurisdictions. There's no reason why it can't be the case in Canada. I do agree that at this point, mail is perhaps something approaching an essential service because people get bills, whatever they get in the mail, and that can happen. But there's going to have to be change, and not piecemeal change, real change. That means privatization.
I think it's the same
Yeah.
with the CBC, right? Because if you look at the CBC, we don't talk about them getting bailed out, but when they're getting over $1 billion a year to run the CBC, that to me is a bailout every year. They get to sell commercials, they get to, sell ads on their website, they get money from the Google plan that the government put in place, they get tax benefits and so on. So really, we're bailing out the CBC to the tune of 1 billion plus every year. So I think it's more than one government department.
Yeah, I mean, the CBC isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's not meeting its mandate. It's not telling Canadian stories. I would perfectly fine with cutting that. The truth is that when it comes to delivering mail to distant, remote communities, to First Nations, that is never going to be profitable. Like you're always going to take a loss on
That's
that
right.
stuff. The same way that when you repair a road, well, you don't make a profit from that. You just spend the money. It's a public service. Does that mean that those people who live out in the countryside or on First Nations shouldn't get mail? Well, of course they should. And I actually agree with both of you that we need to have an honest conversation about this stuff. Government has to be, rather than just saying, okay, we're doing this, there's no alternative, this is the way it is, and that's it. I'm open to solutions, but I also don't like, this kind of constant, life just gets harder and harder and more annoying and more difficult. And this is what people are responding to. Like, oh, all of a sudden now my mail's not going to be delivered to my house. It was for 50 years and now it won't be anymore. Why? Why? People don't get it. And it kind of hurts their confidence. It hurts their sense that government is responsive to them when this is the way that we do things.
The government
So,
is made
Royce,
dependent on them. That's my thought, right? The government has done such a good job of making people dependent on them that people are afraid. Like they don't want to change the government. They don't want to try to get into this, cutting non-essential services because as soon as you start talking about cutting, well, look what Canada Post did. They walked out. Well, you can't do that. We're going to walk out. We're going to go on strike. Now we're not delivering any mail. See how that feels.
so I just want to jump back to a couple of things. One is, Royce, I agree with some of what you're saying, of course, that, people in rural Canada and unreserved, of course, they should get mail. No question about that. But if you had a for-profit privatized parcel service, that can subsidize internally mail service if it's modified to some degree. And privatization takes many different forms. It's not just a fat cat who buys a business for nothing. It could be that the union takes it. There have been some examples of privatization where workers take over companies. And if they feel strongly about it and want to invest their time and money in it, instead of posting foreign affairs issues, if you go to CupW website, they talk about the situation in Israel and Palestine. They get it wrong, but they do talk about that. Maybe they should talk about how to improve the postal service a little bit. Maybe that might be
Yeah.
where they actually
Yeah.
focus some of their effort. And just so we're clear, the CBC subsidy is something like 1.4 to 1.7 billion dollars a year for propaganda, for false news, for wrong news. It's I don't think you can call it news, and where they bid against private companies to show movies and sports and Disney and whatever they're showing, it's it's really unbelievable. And naturally, of course, then they take a biased view at election time because only one, I guess, two parties, the Liberal Party and the NDP, want to keep fattening them, whereas the Conservatives are saying, really, we have to get our fiscal house in order. And by the way, you're doing a disservice to Canadians, so we're going to cut that back. So the CBC is a whole different level of mess. And you're right, Kevin, their upper management each got hundreds of thousands of dollars of bonuses. It's an absurdity.
Yeah.
It's
I'll tell you,
corruption.
yeah, and you're absolutely right, Lawrence. And really, what we're talking about is getting the fiscal House of Canada in order, how the parliamentary budgetary secretary has already sounded the alarm. People better listen to the alarm. But what is our prime minister doing? Our prime minister is on a world tour. I mean, he should have T-shirts. He's going everywhere on a world tour. It's a world tour of nothing, though. Meanwhile, in Canada, we're going further and further in debt. We've got people warning us we can't sustain it. We got businesses moving to the United States. We still can't build a pipeline across the country. We can't get minerals out of the ground. All these things we talked about before the election still are not happening. We hear about cross-border trade and such, and we're not hearing about a lot of that. There was a company in a brewery in Manitoba that said it's still difficult to get their product outside of the province. And our prime minister is on this world tour of shaking hands and getting photo ops while he can.
Yeah, it's and the output is there's really nothing there. I mean, one of the sayings that my dad told me is if you can't dazzle them with no, if you can't dazzle them with brains, baffle them with bullshit. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on this podcast, but traveling around, multiple announcements, huge number of press conferences, this, that, without anything really being said, without anything concrete being announced. And the things that are being concretely announced are, frankly disastrous. I think we're going to talk about recognition of the state of Palestine. So yeah, there's really nothing being done. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of light, but not much coming out of this.
Well, let's talk about the recognition of Palestine because I know both of you have written columns on that. That will be in the Winnipeg Sun this coming weekend. You can read them on winnipegsun.com. Lawrence, we'll start with you. Your article is about exactly what Carney has done. I wrote an article last week just saying he's not my prime minister. This is not the Canada I know and love. But what are your thoughts on this, Lawrence?
My article is called "The Banality of Carney," and it's a take on the banality of evil, because it really is. And Shuv Majumdar talked about this in Parliament. Well, what he's done is so morally bankrupt, and he's done it along with France and Great Britain and a few other countries, and it basically is a reward for terror. There's no hallmark of statehood that the administration in the Palestinian territories can really point to say we're deserving of a state at this point. Mr. Carney really said that he put preconditions on recognition. He then waived them because the Palestinian leadership is completely corrupt. That's just the reality. It's been that way for many, many years. There are still hostages held in tunnels and tortured. And there's really a moral abdication is what's going on. Instead of, and here I'm going to agree with the President of the United States, who talks about the fact that the pressure should be on Hamas, release the hostages. The pressure should be on them to disarm and leave. That's where the pressure should come. Of course, Mr. Carney can't impose pressure really on anybody. So he speaks. He does these things. And I believe one day this is going to be another example where the Liberal government, 50 years from now, issues another tearful apology for the absolute moral abdication that they've done with this. And that isn't to say that at some point in the future that there shouldn't be a different reality. If, in fact, the Palestinian Authority stopped educating their children that their goal in life is to kill Jews, and if they actually educated their children that their goal in life isn't to kill the Druze people, and if they educated their children the goal in life isn't to kill collaborators or people that don't agree with them, and if they would stop being so corrupt, then sure, have some form of state, maybe that's a demilitarized state with certain conditions with the rule of law in place. But to do it now, it's an absolute obscenity, and it's just a huge disappointment. And for the great liberal families, and there's some right here in Manitoba, they are across the country. For Irwin Cotler, who did so much for human rights, but supported the Liberal government in the election, unlike his wife, they need to look in the mirror and say, this is a bridge too far. We have to part company. this is not our Canada. They're not saying it yet. They need to say it, otherwise they're complicit.
I think I agree with you 100%. People need to start talking about it. That's why I wrote that I was disappointed in Canada. I'm disappointed that we would take such a step that would recognize and reward terrorists. And it's interesting. I got some people, of course, that wanted to beat me up on that. We're not rewarding terrorists. Well, we are, and I think it shows because the next day after Britain had come out and recognized them as a state, the Hamas said it was a victory. And now we're going after Britain for repatriation money, which could equal $2 trillion. Now, we know that that's difficult in the courts to get repatriation money and such, but look what happened on day one. On day one, they claim victory and say, okay, now you owe us a couple of $1 trillion to keep things going. But Royce, you're also writing about it, and maybe you're taking a different perspective than Lawrence.
No, I think it's broadly similar. Of course, Hamas celebrated it as a victory because everyone with two brain cells to rub together knows that it was a victory for Hamas. They got statehood without a single concession. Could not these governments, these powerful governments, have negotiated the release of the remaining hostages that are in Gaza in return for statehood? They couldn't even do that. They just gave away the farm. What they did do is they got a concession from the Palestinian Authority that Gaza would be demilitarized and there would be free and fair democratic elections in Palestine that would exclude Hamas in 2026. Well, I'm far from an expert on these issues, but anyone that knows anything about this region, that knows anything about the Palestinian Authority, knows that they can't deliver those things. As I wrote, if you think that's true, I've got some beachfront property in Steinbach I'd like to sell you. And of course, Carney knows this. His advisors know this, and yet they've done it anyway. And so, I mean, Lawrence alluded to this. A lot of times, Canadian foreign policy has more to do with domestic politics than it does with taking a principled position. And a lot of times it has to do with diaspora politics. And I very much fear that Mark Carney, the man that was supposed to be a professional, he was supposed to bring a new level of professionalism to government, is just caving into that, to be honest, with this action.
How bad is going to hurt this with some of our other allies? Like we basically turned our back on an ally. Israel is our ally, it is our friend, and it has been for decades. So now we've turned our back on them, which I always say Carney did without parliamentary approval. It was just like he decided one day on his world tour, sitting in his own green room or something. Well, I think I'm going to recognize Palestine as a state. He didn't go to his government counterparts to get approval for that or to even get their advice. He just went ahead and did it. So what message does this send to our other allies?
A couple things. The reason he did it was revealed by Ms. Joly to Thomas Mulcair some time ago, which is, have you seen the demographic of my constituency? And that's what Royce was alluding to, the diaspora of certain populations. That's what he's appealing to. I think it's 25 members of Congress, I think they were senators mostly, wrote a letter saying essentially that there should be, I'll call them sanctions, but consequences for Canada and Great Britain and France for what they've done. And I should say as well, Royce, I'm not sure if you caught this, the representative from so-called Palestine to Ottawa said that there can't be elections in 2026 because the folks in Jerusalem won't be able to vote. So she's already kiboshed the whole notion that Mr. Carney founded this on. So it's all smoke and mirrors, as you alluded to before, Kevin, this road trip that he's on. It's smoke and mirrors with terrible consequences, both for Canada ultimately, and frankly for the world. And I'm hopeful that at some point people here will wake up and say, this is really unacceptable, especially, and I said this before, I'll say it again, the great liberal families of Canada, the Rays, the Axworthys, the others who know this stuff, who know how wrong this is and are staying quiet. Mr. Kotler has to wake up and say something. That's what I'm hoping for. Naively, some would argue. But I'm hoping that they will wake up and actually make their voices heard. Their voices are important. And if they don't use them, they're complicit in the same morally bankrupt policy.
I want to
So
wrap
did
up
Jolene?
but I want to wrap up here, Royce. We're getting close to our time there, but you can add to what Lawrence said here if you'd like. But I want to talk about something that you said before we started taping the program, and that was that you were literally, for the first time, I guess, ever in your life, worried for Canada.
Yeah, yeah. For my entire life, I've been entirely optimistic about the future of Canada. It's a great country, and not worried about the future. In the last 3 years, I kind of started to change my mind. I don't know what the future holds for this country anymore. I don't really have confidence in politicians. Used to be even like I remember when I was young, Jean Chrétien. I didn't particularly like Jean Chrétien. I had opposed him at the time, but looking back, Canada was well governed by Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin. Like it kind of bothers me to say that. I'm not a supporter of the Liberal Party, but even in that period, Canada was well governed. It was responsible people. Don't always agree with them, but that was the case. Now in Canada, I really have some doubt about that, and it's concerning. Maybe it has to do with becoming a father. You worry more about the future for your kids, but yeah, I'm pretty pessimistic about the direction that we're going in as a country for the first time in my life.
Lawrence, how do you feel? You're a father. Your son is growing now and getting ready to start a career, or already has. What's your thoughts on what's happening, right? Like, if you look at our government spending, if you look at our trajectory financially, and now you look at our, terrible foreign policy, what are your thoughts on the future of our country?
So, Kevin, you're wearing a collar, so I'm going to do a little confession. Um, I liked Paul Martin. I liked Jean Chrétien. I campaigned as a volunteer from Lloyd Axworthy, for David Walker, for our lieutenant governor now, Anita Neville. So I liked these folks at the time, and I thought they governed well, and I thought they had working good moral compasses. That is not what we've seen from young Mr. Trudeau and his godfather in vice, our current prime minister, Mr. Carney. Um, that so, am I pessimistic for Canada? Before I answer that, let me say I love Canada. I love this country, and I'm privileged in that theoretically, like so many corporations, I could leave, but I'm choosing to fight for my Canada, and I know Royce is too, and Kevin, I know you are, and I know lots of people are, and we have to, because it's easy to lose what we've had. It is for sure at risk, and but I think now's the time for strong, intelligent people to stand up and say no, and fight for the Canada that we believe in, the Canada that our parents and grandparents built, and that's what we have to do. And that doesn't mean not welcoming new people too, but new people who have strong and working moral compasses, who want to work, who understand the fiscal reality that we're in, and want to build a strong Canada. And so that's what I want to do. Am I optimistic for it? I hope after the next election, Kevin, I can say that we've turned the corner, and of course the pendulum has swung. That's what I'm hoping for. I can't say I'm super optimistic. I'm on the fence, but I am very worried.
Well, I appreciate, as always, the conversation, gentlemen. We get to be fair and balanced, I think, on this program. So thank you very much. I look forward to reading your columns in the Winnipeg Sun, and you can read them as well by visiting winnipegsun.com. We have a lot to talk about again next week too, because you mentioned immigration. We want to I want to get into a little bit more about some of the LIMA process that's been happening in Canada, and all the information that's coming out about that. And I'm sure we'll have more to talk about with the budget and with politics all across the country. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for watching. As Royce always says, smash the subscribe button, smash the like button. We appreciate you watching, and we'll talk to you next week, gentlemen. Have a good weekend.
Thanks for watching Inside Politics with Kevin Klein. Please like and subscribe to this channel and visit thewinnipegsun.com for more.